Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, today we are going to talk about Indian national movement or freedom struggle in India, and in this course the particular focus that I am going to pay attention to is about historiographical trajectories of colonial India or modern India. This series of lectures thus deal with the way scholarship within the disciplinary domain of history has come to acquire certain shape. But obviously, as we all can assume, knowledge production is not an static thing, it is a dynamic field and it changes in the course of time. This is why to take stock of this scholarship is important, and this is why historiography has a very crucial place in the discipline of history. As I mentioned in the beginning, we are going to focus on colonial period, which we also call as modern period. So today what I am going to talk about is, first I will briefly discuss the conceptual issues and ways of looking at this concept or this term called colonial and modern and associated things. Secondly, when we discuss this term, it will be gradually clear that we need to pay attention to, even though briefly because of the structure of this course, and we do not want to deviate into those arenas, those strands, yet briefly we will talk about the periodization and why periodization is crucial. So, with these two overviews, then we enter into the terrain of historiography, why historiography is crucial, its location in the disciplinary domain of history, and I must here emphasize and put a word of caution, that we are constantly dealing with the discipline of history, and here we should be keeping in mind that when we talk about disciplinary history, it must be distinguished from various other ways of reflecting on past. So, the distinction between past and history is crucial, because past is not the sole domain of history. Literature engages with past, psychology engages with past, there are various other disciplines engages with past. So, here our concern is primarily about the discipline of history, and this is how the course is structured. So, then we will move into having a broad overview of these historiographical interventions or key moment in this discourse in the last 200 years, say broadly from 18th century onwards. So, this is the broad structure I would like to follow in this course and particularly in today's lecture. So, let us move on. As I just mentioned, we are going to have a brief discussion on terms like modern, colonial, anti-colonial, post-colonial, and this will then take us to the division of past into three folds: ancient, modern, and ancient, medieval, and modern. And then we are going to have the relevance of historiography. We need to pay attention to these terms because the terms themselves have history. They are never value neutral, their meanings also keep changing, and there is no singular meaning attached to any of these terms. Take for example, the term that we are going to discuss today, the colonial or the modern. When should we start thinking about or defining colonial period? Is it about the arrival of the British? Is it about, does it start from 1707 when they acquired the trading rights? Is it from 1765 onwards when they got the Diwani rights of Bengal? Or should we start from 1858 when Crown formally took over the administration of India from the hands of British East India Company? When does modern begin in India? That may be a very fruitful way or a very provocative question. There can't be any single answer. There ought not to be any single answer. A historian's job is not to give verdict. And what do we mean by modern? When does we start thinking about periodization as modern? In Indian context, some historians use modern period maybe conveniently when with the formation of Indian National Congress in 1885. Some go back, as I mentioned, in 18th century. So, there is no consensus, and this takes us to a key question, that how to distinguish a period, how to call it modern period. When did we start thinking about the time as divided into three: modern, ancient, and medieval? And what are these what are the implications of this division? If we think this question from another vantage point, many of the textbooks that begin with East India Company or 18th century. This is just to remind that with the death of Aurangzeb in 1707, a period began which witnessed the decline of great Mughal empire. So, just as we were talking about the plurality in conceptualizing the beginning of modern India or colonial India, the similar question applies to when should we stop. Many textbooks stop with 1947 when India attained freedom. Some even extend it to 1950 when India adopted its constitution on 26 January. But should we stop there? Scholars have argued, have shown us continuity and change even in the post independence period. Now, post independence period is also looked at or termed as post colonial period. Now, post colonial, the term has twin meanings. It refers to epistemic break with the colonial frameworks, colonial agencies, whether political or colonial ways of looking, colonial knowledge production, etc. And it is also about a period when India got freedom from British rule. So, both these twin dimensions continue. Why this continuity is significant? Because unlike political freedom, which is no doubt a significant break when we look at or compare between 1947 and pre-1947 phase. But unlike the political, the social cultural arenas, we do not come across similar division. Social institutions and their agencies, their characteristics or cultural life, they continue. They necessarily do not follow the political divide. So, hence many institutions continued, and it is very difficult or it is not prudent to identify the clear or sharp break. And as we progress in this series of lectures, many of these issues will gradually be clear. Now, coming back to the question of modern, because you must have noticed now that I have been referring to modern and colonial in the context of India almost simultaneously. There may be problems in this conflation of the term, and that we also need to pay attention to, and which we will indeed pay attention to. But when did this term modern emerge? In what historical epoch this term emerged and how it got transported to Indian history. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this takes us to the core of periodization. In Indian context, obviously the term modern came along with the British. It's British scholarship which announced that with the arrival of them, Indian history entered into a modern phase. But what is the intellectual lineage of this term? What is the history of this term when Britishers were using this term in Indian context? This comes from European tradition, and the story goes back to Renaissance, a very important epoch in the history of in the world history. Renaissance, as we all can recall from our previous classes at different levels from school level onward, in a very nutshell, in a very crude way, Renaissance was the discovery of the classical. It was argued, and then philosophers, scholars, artists, the group which we often refer to as humanists, they distinguished their own contemporary times, which was 14th, 15th century Western Europe, from their immediate past. And this immediate past, they argued or they perceived as dark age. This is when the belief triumphed over reason. In order to take inspiration, Renaissance period went back to the classical Europe, and this classical period, this rediscovery of the past, that epoch was considered as ancient. So, hence we come across a tripartite division of time, where the classical past was termed as ancient, the immediate past, which was source of all the bad things in society, in the polity, was considered as medieval, and their own contemporary period was considered as modern. So, from early 14th century, we come across terms like tempora antique and tempora nova, and the genesis of this goes into European art and aesthetics. For example, Giovanni Boccaccio, whose period is 1303 to 1374, so roughly the stretching across the 14th century. He inferred the inception of modern age by reading the paintings of Giotto. Then Giorgio Vasari, the first scholar to inaugurate the concept of chronology in art, he came up with a conceptualization of time into maniera antica, maniera vecchia and maniera moderna. However, no, before we go, it is important to mention another name, Francesco Petrarch, the great humanist of 14th century, and he distinguished the dichotomy between dark age and contemporary spirit of curiosity. As I mentioned, the triumph of the medieval age was when belief prevailed over reason, and Renaissance marked the triumph of reason over belief, knowledge over superstition, the triumph of curiosity, age of curiosity. Yet the concept of periodization had to wait till 17th century, when scholars reflected on Renaissance period. And it was in this, during the age of enlightenment, the periodization acquired ideological, intellectual and visceral dimensions. For example, Voltaire, whose time is 1694 to 1778, and he voiced modernity in this manner, which had ideological substances attached to it, which had intellectual energy attached to it. So, we get a scenario in which the time gets divided into three, between ancient, medieval and modern. However, no matter how pervasive this division was and is, there are various other ways, there has been various other ways of looking at time and this division. For example, in the context of French Revolution in the second half of 18th century, we come to know that the division was largely between the ancient and the modern. So, everything associated with a phase prior to French Revolution was termed as ancien régime. Conservatism, traditions which may hamper the progress of values associated with French Revolution, all these are bracketed, framed in that domain of ancient regime, and everything positive came to acquire the label of the modern. Now, this, whether the division of time which acquired a shape in context of Renaissance, or in context of French Revolution, the division always had certain subjective dimensions attached to it. And this is where historical scholarship is also about historical interpretation. And the reason I am explaining these is also to highlight the significance of context in the discipline of history. So, it is unlike any other discipline, context is very prominent and it values immensely in the discipline of history. Any historical fact or phenomena has to be interpreted by locating them in their given context. And this is why when we talk about emergence or use or history of any concept, we have to go back to the specific time which produced, and then subsequently how these concepts travel in across the time. This is then also takes us to another caution, that concepts are not homogeneous. So, periodization is also not homogeneous. In case of history of ideas or concepts like modern, this is much more palpable. For example, in France, a very influential school of thought, a very powerful historiographical intervention which is known as Annales school. There a slightly nuanced and complicated understanding of periodization emerged, particularly from the writings of a historian called Ferdinand Braudel. While he followed the broad structure of this periodization that we just talked about, he came up with his own threefold division. In that scheme, the first part he termed as geohistory, and the often used term there is longi duri. This is a phase when he argued society developed at much slower pace. This is when the human society and the climate, the nature are analyzed closely, and this is where he is paying lot of attention to issues like geography, environment, and he argues that in this phase the development, the pace of development, progress is much more slow. And this is why when we talk about periodization, we should not follow a calendrical time. The second phase he identifies is called intermediate pace of change. This is where he talks about social changes, social medium term or time taken by movements of economies, social structures, political institutions, civilizations and wars. The third part he deals with is about politics, events and people. So, this is a very different kind of approach to period in history. Earlier, Friedrich Engels, while writing The Origins of Family, again a very influential tract, he looks at the economic aspects and gives more prominence to that when looking at periodization. I am not going into the detail of these arguments, but I am just signposting them so that when references of these may occur, or we may at least know the different trajectories through which periodization or the idea of periodization come before us. Now, historians have also questioned many of the assumptions or postulates that we just talked. For example, feminist scholarship have questioned that all the good things, positive things we associate with Renaissance, should we not engender that understanding? In simple terms, the question, very provocative question which has been asked is, did women have a Renaissance? Now, thinking in that turn, thinking in that way, then give us a very different understanding of modern or ancient or medieval. Finally, when we willy-nilly import these categories from the experiences of Western Europe and its past, the danger which scholars have pointed out are about universalizing meanings inherent in these categories. So, for example, what may be termed as modern for Western Europe may not be appropriate in the case of colonies which Britain ruled for over 2.5 centuries. Now, nevertheless, notwithstanding these limitations, we do often use these terms, but the point that I am trying to draw attention here is to remain aware about these trajectories and these problems inherent in these terms, these concepts. Last but not least, I would like to mention in our discussion of periodization a very recent concept. It is called Anthropocene, and largely emerging in the discourse on climate change scholars are more and more using this term to distinguish the contemporary phase of human evolution from the past, and this is, they argue, is the current geological phase. Again, I repeat, I am merely signposting these concepts, I am not going in detail, but these have strong linkages when we go into the historiographical trajectories, or this is important also because we are somewhere delimiting our own field of discussion here, because as our focus is on modern period. Having briefly gone through the aspects of periodization and the term modern, now let us come to the operational part, which is historiography. Historiography, as I mentioned earlier, is the discourse of history writing. It is the scholarship within the discipline of history. This scholarship has disciplinary significance, and here we need to differentiate between history's disciplinary engagement with the past from other ways of looking at past. Now, for example, take the case of historical novel. Are they not relevant for history? Certainly, they are relevant for history. Can we take historical novels merely as resource? No, we should not, because many times these historical novels are full of insights and they try to go beyond the disciplinary confines of history. For example, if we take the case of Ibis trilogy by Amitav Ghosh, I am referring his very famous novels like Sea of Poppies, River of Smoke and Flood of Fire. Now, Amitav Ghosh himself is a trained anthropologist, and then he is going into 18th century scenario, developments around Opium War, and he extensively uses archival facts to weave his story, and through his writings we get enchanted by a landscape which is sometimes North India, plains of North India, Bihar. At another moment, it is about the journey, ship journey in the sea, and then it is about Southeast Asia, different settlements in Southeast Asia. And he plays with geography, he plays with historical facts, but he is also mobilizing a vast amount of hitherto ignored archival facts. Should we consider this as a historiographical intervention? I again do not want to give a verdict, it is an open question. However, history as a discipline again I am going back to my earlier argument, differentiates itself from other genres like historical novel. It overlaps with these genres, yet it distinguishes. It many times we enter into a zone or scholarly engagement where things overlap, conflate with each other, and there is no harm in it, because I believe there can't be a singular way of achieving knowledge, and if historiography is about knowledge production of past, then there ought to be plural ways of looking at past and history. And these questions have been debated immensely, and the robustness of this debate also points to the journey history as a discipline has travelled in the course of time. Now, when we talk about history as a discipline, there are some crucial aspects attached to it, which are the crucial or the significance given to sources. In the discipline of history, sources are extremely significant, extremely important. Then the context, we have to analyze, interpret these sources only by putting them in their specific context, and it is this use of sources and the context, it is their interplay and the way historians look at this interplay that differentiates history with literature or history with other disciplines. The third thing is obviously what we have been dealing with, is the historiography. It is the scholarship, it is how people who have travelled that path earlier, how they have looked at the past or the particular aspects of the past. So, in that sense, like any other discipline, history builds upon the previous knowledge traditions of looking at past, and it is from this engagement with earlier works, earlier arguments, historians make progress or intervene, and this is how history as a discipline also progresses. Else, if we ignore the works of previous historians, if we ignore historiography, if we take it for granted, then we end up repeating similar arguments, we end up only doing a very ritual service to phenomena of the past. This is why historiography is significant. It cautions us and it also inspires us, it provokes us. Here again I would like to pay a brief attention to something which is crucially linked to it, which is historical consciousness. I must make it clear that historiography and historical consciousness are two different things. Yet at the same time, I would also say that they overlap. Let me briefly explain this. Historical consciousness is, again, in a very simple term, is about awareness of knowledge about the past. Now, one can argue that historiography is also about recovering this knowledge which earlier historians have produced. But historical consciousness, if I give you a very concrete example, is not merely about awareness of the disciplinary history of past, or not, it is not merely about the past of contemporary times. For example, let me again clarify this, elucidate this slightly obtruse formulation, slightly abstract formulation. When Britishers came to India, a good number of them, and we will go into detail there, in 18th century, they argued that India lacked sense of history. Indians did not have historical consciousness. So, what they meant was that a particular way of looking at past, a dispassionate way of looking at past, dispassionate endeavor of knowledge production about the past, and they argued that India did not have history because Indians lacked historical consciousness. Now, this obviously has been contested by many, and we may not need to go into that trajectory here. Maybe we can return to that later in some other form. Another example I would pose here is how the two overlap, the historical consciousness and historiography. Again, if we go to the scenario of late 19th century, when a good number of Indian intelligentsia, they were critiquing economic policies of British government. They obviously were reflecting on the history of their own contemporary times, and they were critically reflecting on the structures of their own time. Was it about historical consciousness of their own period? Should we not take it in our discussion of historiography? Obviously, we have to take into account these interventions, because these interventions shaped generations and generations of economic critique of colonial regime. So, that is an example I offer where historical consciousness and historiography both conflate. Another example, a popular example, if I would give a very powerful example, is the literature by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. We are all familiar with his novel Anand Math. Many films are also made on Anand Math. Our Bande Mataram comes from there. Now, in Anand Math, Bankim Chandra offers his own interpretation of past, and that we may call historical consciousness, which he had developed and which he was presenting before us, before his readers. Now, this book, this novel and the history writings in that period in late 19th century, which had a certain investment, certain understanding of certain ways of looking at past, which may be termed as historical consciousness in that period, is also extremely crucial signpost when we talk about historiography. Having given these examples, the point of difference that I would like to emphasize here and which we need to keep in mind in the course of these lectures is simply the fact that when we are talking about historiography of modern India, we are not concerned about how scholars in this period looked at other time frames. For example, how they looked at ancient, what kind of discourses was taking place on ancient India, or how they looked at medieval period. I am not concerned with those aspects, those are very crucial aspects, but here in our discussion on historiography of modern India, that is beyond our scope of things. So, that is a pragmatic concern which we need to keep in mind. For example, this is the period when archaeology is coming up. This is the period when in the field of sociology, historical sociology is coming up, and from all these domains scholars are engaging with the past about other traditions of generating knowledge about the past, which may not be considered as history by certain historians or scholars having a very strict definition of what is history and what is not history, but which may be equally having a valid stake about the knowledge of past coming from non-Western locations. And historians have looked at those traditions, have looked at different ways of looking at time and looking at and producing the knowledge of past in pre-colonial periods. Yet for our purpose, we are not venturing into those dimensions, because we are here, we want to remain focused on historiography or historical writings on modern India, historical scholarship which have emerged on this period roughly corresponding to last 250 years. And this scholarship takes into account the knowledge production about past from 18th century up to the contemporary period. So, that is the range that we are going to talk about, and we will be discussing about different schools, different interventions. We will start with 18th century and we will gradually move towards 19th and then 20th century, the scholarship produced on history. Before concluding this lecture, let me also warn you that historiography, when we are talking about historiography, historiographical trajectories, we are not going to deal with the events or the social processes which are taking shape. However, just as context is extremely crucial in history, we need to place historiographical interventions, historiographical schools in their specific context, and only for that purpose we will also be revisiting or passing attention on the contextual aspects, events, significant signposts of this period. With this, we will move to our core concerns from the next lecture onwards. Thank you.